How's it going, everybody? The PlayStation Store is currently running its major Halloween sale, along with a bunch of other sales, but I want to primarily focus on the Halloween sale in this video and look at game deals under the price of $10. A lot of great stuff, a lot of games for that Halloween mood. If you guys are looking for some horror titles, definitely a lot of that in this video. So let's get right into it, and starting the video off, obviously when you talk about horror games on a Halloween sale, Resident Evil is gonna be at the heart of it. So let's just go through a couple of them. Resident Evil 2 is 75% off for $9.99. The game is great. This really kicked off the wave of Resident Evil remakes, and they did a fantastic job with Resident Evil 2. Now, bear in mind, I wasn't a Resident Evil 2 original player. Let's just say it was a little bit before my time. I think I was super young when it came out, and Resident Evil 2 at that point wouldn't have really been my cup of tea. But I played the remake, loved it, thought it was great. There are puzzles, but it's pretty straightforward, and what they get right is the atmosphere and ambiance, and I always say that that is the most important part of a Resident Evil game, and a horror game in general, to be perfectly honest. Also want to give a shout to Resident Evil Revelations, which I think is super underrated. This game originally started off as a Nintendo 3DS game, so yes, it's a direct port of a 3DS game that is upgraded, updated, but it's a really solid game. Like, they did a good job with this game. I found it compelling, just like a lot of the other Resident Evil titles, engrossing, but just keep in mind, like, technically, it leaves a lot to be desired, given that it is a port of a 3DS game. And then lastly, we have Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, and this is the game that really got Resident Evil back on track for a lot of people, given that, you know, there was a little game called Resident Evil 6 that, let's just say, a lot of people didn't enjoy. I thought it was okay in some regards, but Resident Evil 7 really turned the ship around and steered the ship around and brought Resident Evil back to the forefront. And after this game, you got the remakes and everything like that. RE7 is great. Once again, incredibly tense. The atmosphere is great. Narrative is great. And also, there's a really solid VR component in here as well. If you have PlayStation VR 1, it's one of the best VR experiences that you can have. I've had people that aren't even into video games get super into RE7's VR component, and it's a good game if you want to use it as a gateway of that sorts. But $7.99 for this is fantastic. Check that out. Next up, we have DMC Devil May Cry Definitive Edition. This is actually a game by Ninja Theory, the same studio that brought you Enslaved Odyssey to the West. They did Hellblade, and they are working on Hellblade 2, and they've worked on a bunch of other games that I'm forgetting about off the top of my head. But DMC Devil May Cry, also a game they worked on. Now, this is a game that had kind of a mixed reception when it initially came out. I think just because it was a little bit of a shift from the original Devil May Cry games that so many people loved. However, if you go into DMC Devil May Cry just expecting a good action game, you're gonna enjoy the game a lot more, and you're not gonna go into it with that expectation anymore of it being a Devil May Cry game that is supposed to be true to the originals or anything like that. Like, DMC 5 exists, so that issue kind of got alleviated, but this is still a solid action game that I would say is a worthwhile playthrough. For this price point, I think it's pretty good. Next up, we have Until Dawn, 50% off for $9.99. This is done by Supermassive Games. They've actually done a lot of narrative-driven, choice-driven games, and obviously they worked on the Dark Pictures series, but Until Dawn came out all the way back in 2014, and it was really one of the early PlayStation 4 exclusives, and it turned out to be pretty decent. Now, it's very, like, cheesy horror movie, and I'm not the biggest fan of that, but for some reason, there was a certain charm with Until Dawn that made it enjoyable. There's also a game that you can gather around with friends and you can just have them watch as you play it, even if they're not into video games. I found that to be, you know, kind of a staple to the Until Dawn experience. Obviously, you can play it solo. The game is single player, but yeah, if you do want to have that kind of party atmosphere and, you know, movie atmosphere, you can have that as well with Until Dawn. The game is available on PlayStation Plus Extra, but for $9.99, I think it's a pretty good price. Next up, we have Little Nightmares 2. This is 67% off for $9.89. What a fantastic price for Little Nightmares 2. A really well made horror game that has a great tone to it, a great visual style as well, which I feel like Little Nightmares doesn't get a lot of love for, and it is a super eerie game. I would say give it a shot. There's a reason why we are getting a Little Nightmares 3 now. Little Nightmares 1 was really good. This one I thought was better, and I would say go pick up the first one, don't get me wrong, but this one was really good, and Little Nightmares 3 should be out in 2024, so $9.89 for this. Pretty good. Next up, we gotta give it a mention. You guys already know, the Order 1886, 50% off for $9.99, baby. Yeah, I'm a broken record with this game, but there's a lot of aspects of Order 1886 I really like. Now, obviously, when it initially came out back in 2015, this game had a lot of issues in terms of it was a $60 game and it was like 5 hours long. Yeah, that wasn't gonna fly. It still won't fly today. It didn't fly back then, and even for $9.99, like 5 hours of gameplay is gonna be like, whoa, what's going on here? But those 5 to 7 hours or however long you spend with it. Order 1886 I thought was a super compelling game. The visuals still to this day, 8.5 years after the launch of this game, look fantastic. This is one of the best looking video games that you are going to see on the market. It had such a cool premise, such a cool setting that it's so unfortunate that it ultimately won't be realized into what I think the studio wanted to do, which is really sad to think about, but you know, you can't win them all, and Order 1886 didn't win that battle, but I still think it's a worthwhile experience to go through, at least as a single playthrough. And for $9.99, you know what? It's a sixth of the original cost. That's a price point that I can get down with. Next up, we have The Evil Within 2, 80% off for $7.99. This is available on Plus Extra, but is a Bethesda title. I imagine it's gonna get pulled from Plus Extra at some point, so keep that in mind. Evil Within 2, I think, is a really solid horror game. A little bit on the action-y side, but it works really well. This is done by Tango Gameworks. Obviously, they did a first Evil Within, and I would say play through that if you can, but if you just want to jump into Evil Within 2, you can do that as well. They also did Ghostwire Tokyo. Evil Within definitely leans more on the horror side than Ghostwire did, in my opinion, but for $8, Evil Within 2 is a really solid pickup, and worthwhile to check this one out. Again, available on Plus Extra, but to own it, this is a good price. Next up, we have SOMA, 80% off for $5.99. Guys, I love SOMA. I think this game is so good, and in my opinion, it is Frictional Games' best title that they've put out. Amnesia the Bunker might have taken that reign, but you know, Soma's damn good as a horror game, and I'm not super into these eerie, murky horror games, but this game had such a great atmosphere. It's set in this underwater remote research facility, and it has the vibes of a horror game. I know I say that over and over again, but I think that's so important with a horror game, that you really get that horror tone right, and Soma really gets that element of, okay, this game is spooky as all hell, and there is a psychological narrative attached to it. For $6, I think Soma is great, and I would strongly give it a recommendation. Next up, we have Darksiders Genesis, 80% off for $7.99. This game is done by one of the more underrated studios in all of gaming, and that is Airship Syndicate. Airship Syndicate has done a lot of great work, and they've put out a lot of good games. Obviously, nothing like Blockbuster, but they also put out Battle Chasers Night War and Ruin King, a League of Legends story. Right now, they're working on something that is an MMORPG, and I'm not completely sold on it, but we'll see how it ultimately turns out when it officially comes out. But Darksiders Genesis was a really solid top-down action RPG set in the Darksiders universe, but you can play this game without playing the others. It's set before the original game, so you can play it no problem. And for this price point, $7.99 is pretty good. It's available on Plus Extra, so again, you can play it that way, but overall, for this price, I think this is a solid pickup. Next up, we have Oxenfree. This is the bundle with the game and the dynamic theme if you're on PS4. I'm sure an Oxenfree dynamic theme probably looks pretty awesome. I don't have my PS4 hooked up. I don't think I have the dynamic theme for Oxenfree in my library. I honestly couldn't tell you. But Oxenfree is a really well-done narrative-driven game. It's done by Night School Studio. It's actually a studio composed of former developers from Telltale, I believe. And obviously, you know, that comes through here. It's got some supernatural elements, but really well done character interactions that are relatable, and overall a really engaging narrative. Oxenfree 2 just came out, but being story-driven games, I would recommend you to play Oxenfree 1, and I think that's part of the reason why Oxenfree 1 has gone up in price seemingly for this discounted release, because Oxenfree 1 would literally be like $2 at times, so that's kind of a bummer, but you gotta do what you gotta do, and this is still a decent price for Oxenfree 1. Next up, we have Fallout 4 Game of the Year Edition, 75% off for $9.99. It's Fallout 4 with all of the DLC. I want to recommend this game as much as I can before the upgrade comes out, whenever it does come out. It's supposed to be 2023. It looks like it won't be 2023 at this point. We're almost at the end here. We're at the home stretch, and we should probably know about a date for the upgrade if it was coming out this year. But Fallout 4 was a game that had an insane amount of hype leading up to its release, and I actually liked how Bethesda handled the announcement of this game. They just announced it, I believe, at E3, and then it came out that fall. Like, everybody knew it was in development, but it wasn't one of these Elder Scrolls 6 nonsense games where the trailer came out, back in 2018, and we're in 2023, and the game is now just entering development. Like, yo, come on, that stuff's lame. Fallout 4 was handled well, but it was also a time where they were turning out games a little bit quicker. But the game was a little bit disappointing. Obviously, it had a lot of technical issues, but it's still the open world Bethesda fun that I think people can have. Just, you know, you're gonna go into it with tempered expectations. At this point, I feel like most of you guys played, but if you didn't, if you don't have the DLC, the Game of the Year Edition's a pretty good buy. And then lastly, we have Outlast Trinity. This is 90% off for $9.89. Definitely captures the mood of Halloween. Outlast, you've got Outlast Whistleblower and Outlast 2 all in one bundle. for $5.89 is definitely great. Outlast was definitely pushing the envelope a little bit, for me at least, when it came to horror games. Like, some of that stuff was a little gruesome, let's be real here with Outlast, but definitely one of those horror games that ain't for the faint of heart, to say the least. $5.89 for this one, pretty good for the bundle. But that'll do it for me. Again, Halloween sale bringing in with it a lot of great deals. We'll cover the fall savings sale a little bit more in a future video. We got a lot to cover because they're running a lot of sales. Fall savings, Halloween sale, games under 15, just a lot to cover, but hopefully we'll get through a lot of it here in the coming days. And then we got Black Friday coming up, holiday sales, just gonna be a busy time for the next couple of months on top of all the big game releases that we've had over the last month or so. Just a hectic time for gaming. It's not gonna end anytime soon, not even at the end of this year. Like, going into next year is gonna be crazy as well. So a lot to be excited for, a lot of deals, a lot of games, and a lot of good stuff all around. That'll do it for me. Sound off with all of your thoughts in the comments section down below. Thank you for watching, and goodbye. Hey guys, we hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, make sure to hit the subscribe button, and if you're already subscribed, do us a favor and hit the bell icon. This way you'll be notified whenever we post a new video. That's the best way to keep up with all of our uploads, and we usually try to upload 2 videos a day. And with the bell icon hit, you'll be notified whenever we do upload a video. As always, thanks for watching.